Good evening, everyone. I'm Robert Smythe, Executive Director of Hippogriff's History Channel here in London, England. Here I am in front of a replica of the 1607 Godspeed that took the original 104 settlers from Great Britain to North America, thus creating the prelude to the United States of America. In this series of documentaries about antebellum United States 1812 to 1861, I have the pleasure of introducing 14 distinguished scholars who are experts in this field of American history, all from some of the most prestigious universities in the world. In this episode, I'd like to introduce the winner of last year's Bancroft Prize and a scholar who never fails to impress, the Honorable Professor Adam Hernacki from Ohio University. Among his notable publications are American Historical Society Prize winners, Agrarian Culture in the North, and The Impact of the Cotton Gin on the U.S. Economy. I will now leave you in his capable hands to discuss life in the rural North in antebellum United States.
Welcome to episode 3 of our documentary series about antebellum United States history, 1812 through 1861. In the previous presentations, we discussed life as a northern factory owner and life as a northern factory worker. I am Professor Adam Hernacki, a scholar of history at Ohio University, and I am now going to discuss life as a person in the rural North. After the War of 1812, when the British no longer posed a threat to American safety, it was a time of great change in the United States. There were many inventions such as the cotton gin, steam trains, and the telegraph. Factories were being built in the North and plantations were prospering in the South. Even though many people still wanted to work in factories, most of the people still lived on small farms. In this episode, I will take a closer look at what life was like for those living in the countryside in the rural North during this period. As large industrial cities such as Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Baltimore, and Boston were growing in the North, most people still lived in the countryside. The rural North was a section of small farms above latitude 3630. The rural North was farming areas in all of the free states in the North. Although wealthy Northerners were more focused on building factories and industrialism, most people still lived on small subsistence farms. This meant that people grew crops in order to survive. Even though the North was way ahead of the South in industrialization, they were still able to keep up with the South in crop production. Northern farmers were starting to use farming machinery, whereas the South still relied on millions of slaves. By the time of the Civil War, the northern states produced more of the country's food than the South. The farms in the North provided over half of the supplies for the Northern Army during the Civil War. The rural North in the 1860s was a unique place with its own culture and challenges. Daily routines were heavily dependent on agriculture, with most families working long hours on their own farms. Social customs were also closely tied to the land, with communities forming around shared interests in local events. Economic challenges were significant, as many farmers struggled to make ends meet and faced competition from larger, more established operations. Despite these difficulties, the rural North played a crucial role in the Civil War effort, providing over half of the supplies for the free states. The contribution of the rural North helped secure victory for the Union and cemented the importance of the region in American history. There were about 2 million farms in the North in the 1860s. Most of these were subsistence farms that were family-owned. The land was originally claimed by white settlers throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. Nearly 40% of the northern states were farmland as of the 1860s, whereas 84% of the southern states were farmland. In the 1860s, wealthy white men owned most of the farmland, while small-scale farmers struggled to maintain ownership. This reflected the societal and financial structures of that era. Because of the type of soil that was in the North, there were not any plantations. The soil was mostly fit for smaller farms. The climate in the North meant that only one cycle of crops could be produced in 1 year. There were often 3 cycles in the South. Farming was very hard because they did not have the machinery we have today. It was a very hands-on task that required determination and endurance. It was even harder during the war because most of the young men joined the army. With the shortage of people to help, it created a revolution in farming machinery. During this period, farmers created the first design of a tractor. The northern side of farming relied on manufacturing new tools and finding new crops to farm. Farming in the 1860s was an incredibly difficult task. Farmers had to rely on manual labor and basic tools to work the land and cultivate crops. Plowing fields was done with a horse-drawn plow, and planting was done by hand. There were no modern technologies like tractors, irrigation systems, or pesticides to assist them in their work. Additionally, the weather was unpredictable and harsh, making it difficult to grow crops consistently. Farmers also had to deal with pests and diseases that could wipe out entire fields. Despite these challenges, farmers persevered and worked tirelessly to provide for their families and communities. Life on the farm was hard because most of the farmers were in the army. This forced the farmers to do more work, which was a struggle for them as they could not farm everything at once. If there were not a high enough supply of men to do the work on the farm, sometimes women would take over. Although there was a shortage of farmers, it created an industrial revolution for them. Instead of doing most of the farming by hand, they would use newly invented machinery for harvesting crops. During the Civil War, farmers also had to provide more supplies to the Union. The soldiers had to be fed and clothed. The upside to this is that the farmers got more money for their work because they supplied horses, wool, pork, and beef. The main supplier to the army were the farms in New York. In the end, the Civil War was kind of good for the North, but the farmers got more money and manufactured machines for farming. Wheat was the king crop in the North during that time because it was needed to make many food items like bread. It also required expensive machinery and animals to farm and produce. Yes, the war did affect farmers. It started a revolution in farming technology, but made the work harder. The farmers also got higher pay, which was good for them. The farmers were paid $408, and that's $14,838 in today's money, for one batch of supplies to the army. When the war started, many farmers lost their teenage children who helped them farm. This made work harder for the farmers and forced them to purchase machines. This created a revolution in farming technology. During the Civil War, they improved the plow, designed a corn planting machine, and created a steam-driven threshing machine. This made farming easier and faster. They also had steam tractors, which helped farmers with plowing and harvesting. With the new threshers, one farmer could do the work of 6 men in 1 hour. The war also helped the farmers gain more money from their work because the army needed supplies. This included wheat, pork, beef, leather, wool, and horses. The constant need in the army for resupply also helped. The meat for food, the wool and leather for uniforms, and the horses for travel. Another plus was that if the military needed a resupply while traveling, the farms were everywhere. The prominent manufacturer of the supplies was Illinois. In 1860, there were 142,338 farms in Illinois, and they gained $57.6 million during the war period. During the antebellum period of the United States history, there were 2 million farms in the rural North. Most of these were small subsistence farms that were family-owned. Their main objective was to grow enough food to survive. Life was difficult, and hours were long. The difference between farming in the South and the North was great. In the South, they used slaves and farmed more cotton. In the North, they employed their families and planted more corn and wheat. There were also more farms in the north, making it easier for the northern armies to be resupplied. The farmers also got paid for their resupplies, which was a lot in today's money. The farmers provided enough food for everyone in the north and allowed its cities to focus on the Industrial Revolution.